Today's class is called Back to Basics. It's great for beginners or people brand new to yoga, and it's also great as a refresher, as we'll be talking a lot about moving with a neutral pelvis and a neutral spine. So before we get started, we'll go over a few things before we get moving. The first thing we're going to talk about is our neutral pelvis. So our pelvis is like a bowl. We've got the front of the pelvis, which is the pubic bone. The sides of the pelvis are the ilium, and the back is the sacrum. So we really want to picture our pelvic bowl like a bowl that we don't want spilling or tipping forward or backwards. So our goal is to be moving with this upright pelvis or neutral pelvis. The next thing we're going to talk a lot about is our triple S. So that's how we can tell if we have a neutral spine. Our triple S is the back of our skull, our shoulder blades, and our sacrum right above our tailbone. We'll talk about scapula a lot. Our scapula are our shoulder blades, so they're those big triangular bones on the back of our ribs, and they move in a lot of different directions. They move up into elevation, down into depression, they move away from the spine and protract, and they squeeze in toward the spine and retract. So if I mention scapula, that just means our shoulder blade. The last thing we're going to go over is something that will help when weight bearing. So it's something called energetically dialing the hands out. Whenever we're weight bearing, so even in a quadruped or a plank pose, we want to try this action of dialing the hands out. We're not actually going to pick up our hands and move them. We're just using the muscles we would use to kind of turn the hands out. So you can imagine that your hands are on two plates and the plates just start to spin out to the sides. And what this is going to do is create a lot of stability from the wrist all the way up into that shoulder blade, our scapula. It's the same kind of movement or torque we use when opening a really tight jar. So it's just that energetic dialing out, and we'll try that a few times. If you have a broom nearby at any point, a broom is a great way to get some feedback on your triple S. So I say a lot of times, imagine if you had a broom behind your back. Would it touch the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and sacrum? So feel free to have a broom nearby if you want to add that in at some point. So feel free to try that. We're going to get started on our backs. So go ahead and lie down. And right away, we'll check that triple S we just talked about. Make sure the back of your skull is on the mat, your shoulder blades or scapula, and your sacrum right above your tailbone. So a really nice way to tell if you tend to tip forward in the pelvis is if you're lying on your back and you can easily put a hand under your low back, between your low back and the mat. So if you have that little arch there, the pelvis is tipping forward, and we want to close off that gap by pressing the sacrum down so we have that neutral spine. Hands can come along the sides of your body, and we're just going to work the action of hip flexion. So we're going to pick up the right foot. As much as you can, try to bring this right thigh toward the belly, but make sure nothing changed in your sacrum or the rest of your spine. And then we'll do it on the left side. Pick up that left foot, bring it in toward the belly. So this is our action of hip flexion. We'll be doing this in a lot of different ways. It's a really functional movement that our bodies really need to know how to do for sustainable movement, and this will help with everything: walking, running, hiking, bending down, picking things up off the ground. So it's this action of moving the hip joint without anything in the pelvis or the rest of the spine moving. Bring both feet down, and we'll come into bridge pose. We're going to bring our palms to our pelvic points. They're called our ASISs. Those are the bony parts at the front of our pelvis. So our palms are going to come to those pelvic points, and we're going to make a diamond shape with our hands. So our fingers are going to point down toward the pubic bone, which is the front of the pelvis, and our thumbs will point up toward our belly button. So we've got this diamond shape, and we're going to imagine this whole diamond could draw in. So we're going to imagine that those two pelvic points draw in toward each other, and the top and bottom of the diamond, the pubic bone and the belly button, draw in. So we'll keep that feeling as we lift into bridge pose, staying really low, and we want to use our glutes here. So really squeeze the glutes. Our glutes are one of our biggest mover muscles. They help us extend the hip, flex the hip, do lots of things. So we really want to pay attention to our glutes and make sure we're using them as much as possible. So again, bring that diamond shape to the pelvis, and really picture that whole diamond drawing in, sides of the diamond, those two pelvic points, top and bottom of the diamond, pubic bone and belly drawing in toward each other. Chin will stay toward the throat. Hold here for one more breath. Keep lots of activity in the glutes. And we'll slowly lower the upper back, middle back, and lower back down. Once the sacrum comes down, hands will come behind the head. So we're just going to interlace the hands and draw the elbows in towards your face. By drawing the elbows in, that will make it easier to lift up our shoulder blades. So again, check that the sacrum is down. So make sure there's no arch between your low back and the mat. Big inhale here. As you exhale, we're going to lift off the shoulder blades just a little bit. So it's not a big crunch. Tuck your chin towards your throat. Use your eyes to look down at those two pelvic points and really think about drawing those pelvic points in. Inhale to lower. Exhale, curl up off your shoulder blades. Tuck your chin towards your throat so the neck stays neutral. And again, picture that diamond. That whole diamond drawing in, sides of the diamond draw in, top and bottom of the diamond, just like bridge pose, draw in. Inhale to lower. Exhale, curl up off your shoulder blades, tuck your chin towards your throat. Make sure the sacrum stays down. So what we're doing right now is we're getting into the really proximal muscles, the ones closest to the center of the body, those deep core muscles, drawing those pelvic points in. Now look at the belly button. Right where your belly button is, and imagine that your belly button could draw down, almost like we're trying to hollow out the belly. Inhale to lower. One more. Curl up off your shoulder blades as you exhale. Chin towards your throat. Think about drawing that diamond in. Sides of the diamond, top and bottom of the diamond, and belly button draws down. Inhale to lower. Release your arms. We're going to come onto quadruped. So we'll come onto hands and knees. Shoulders are right over your wrist creases. Knees are right over the hips. So if we're too wide, we're going to tip that pelvis forward. And you can even think about that broom here. Lift your throat. If you had a broom behind your back, would it touch the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum? We always want to have the throat lifted when we're weight bearing. If we let the head drop down, that's really going to affect what happens to the shoulders, the neck, and the shoulder blades. So let's try that action of dialing the hands up here. It doesn't look like much is happening if you can see my hands, my arms, but it's almost like this wrapping effect as I imagine dialing the hands out, and that's creating a really stable position for my shoulder blades. And we're just going to hold here. It looks really simple, but there's a lot going on. So we even want to think about that diamond here. So you're going to hold that quadruped and think about that diamond drawing in, sides of the diamond, just like bridge, top and bottom drawing in. So it's actually a good amount of core work here to keep that pelvis neutral. We're going to stretch it out in cat-cow. So this is the time the pelvis gets to tip forward and back. So as the pelvis tips forward, it looks like I'm arching my low back. You can soften the chest down a little bit. And then as you exhale and round the back, the pelvis tips backwards. So you can do that at whatever pace feels good. Stretching your back in this cat-cow movement. And what's happening as we cat-cow is the pelvis tips forward and back. Each part of the back moves from the lumbar spine, our low back, our thoracic spine, the mid-back where the rib cage is, and the cervical spine where the neck is. Come back to this neutral spine. Again, dial the hands out, lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. We're going to lift for downward dog. So we'll tuck our toes under, lift the pelvis straight up toward the ceiling, and walk the feet forward. So in our downward dog, we want to keep the knees bent. The heels never have to touch. And we're going to think about lifting our hip creases right where our thigh bone meets the hip. You can find a little crease here and just try to lift that hip crease up toward the ceiling without straightening the legs. So just like when we were on our back working that hip flexion, this is the same movement of the hip. Our hips are flexing right now, and we want to think about lifting our front ribs up toward the back body so the weight stays in the hands. It's a much shorter stance for downward dog than you might be used to. If you're in a really wide downward dog, putting too much weight into your feet, Your chest is gonna sink really low, which is not a good position for our shoulder capsules. It's definitely not a sustainable way we wanna continue to do downward dog. So really keep the weight in the hands. Feel like everything's lifting up toward the pelvis. Keep drawing those pelvic points in. So even here, we want that feeling of our neutral pelvis. We're gonna walk our hands back toward our feet. Really sitting back into the hips. This is called a happy squat. So right now we're in something called triple flexion, and this is something that's really functional. Our ankles need to be able to flex. So the position our ankle's in right now is called dorsiflexion. Our knees are flexed and our hips are flexed. So again, it's that same action we did on our back and in downward dog. Hip creases move back. Knees should be right over the ankles. If our knees are further forward than our toes, we're not really hinging at the hips, we're just bending our knees. So again, sit those hips back. Try not to collapse or round the back here. We want to hold the sacrum level. Think about that broom touching the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum. Press into your feet and really firm your glutes as you rise to stand. Walk to the top of your mat, and I'm going to show you that triple S with a broom. So if you want to pause and get a broom, it's actually pretty fun to check your posture. I'm going to put the broom right behind my back. And with the broom behind my back, I'm just going to see if it can touch the back of my skull, my shoulder blades, and my sacrum. So right now, if you can look this way, I'm aligned in that neutral posture because the broom is touching that triple S. But if my pelvis were tipped, my shoulders were rounded, the broom would not touch that triple S. So we're just gonna work a hip hinge here. So the broom is gonna stay behind your back, and just like that happy squat, we're gonna sit the hips back. So check where your knees end up. Hip creases move back. Keep that broom on your back, or just imagine that broom at your back. Press into your feet, use your glutes, rise to stand. So the goal is to keep those three things in alignment, hinging at the hips. Check where your knees end up. They should be over the ankles. And then press into the feet, use your glutes, rise to stand. Try that a few more times. You can move as slowly as you want. But we're really gonna keep that feeling of our spine staying aligned. So if you tend to drop the head or round the shoulders forward, this is a great way to get some feedback on your posture. And again, really check where those knees end up. Make sure they're not going further than the toes. So we want this movement to come from the hips. And again, this action of hip flexion or hip hinging is really important for functional movement, especially as we get older. We want to make sure that our hips are still able to flex, our knees are able to flex, and our ankles are still able to flex. Good, let's try that and add it into some more movement. Standing in our mountain pose. So now that we don't have the broom, or I don't have the broom, we're gonna have that same feeling where we have that upright pelvis. So if you tend to tip forward, it looks like arching the back. And we have something called sympathetic curves in our spine. So if our lumbar spine starts to move, our ribs might pop, and vice versa. If we tend to pop the ribs, that's pretty likely to also tip the pelvis. So we really want to feel this stacking of the shoulders right over that neutral pelvis. And we'll keep that feeling as we reach the arms forward and up. Anytime your arms lift up, you want to lift your shoulder blades up towards your ears. So we're getting more length in the sides of the body. We're going to do that same hip hinge without the broom. Sit back into your hips. Really hinge, hinge, hinge. Send those hip creases back. Think about that broom behind your back. And we'll lower the hands, this time stepping back to a plank pose. You can try it with the broom behind your back. You can imagine that broom behind your back. Let's do that action of dialing the hands out, noticing what that does to the shoulder blades, and then lift your throat, draw those pelvic points in just like you would for bridge pose. Lower your knees, you can untuck the toes. Pausing here, make sure that by lowering the knees, we haven't tipped the pelvis forward and we haven't let the head drop down. So again, lift your throat, zipper your pubic bone up towards your belly button. So think about the top and bottom of the diamond, drawing in toward each other. Squeeze your glutes, they're part of the core. As you exhale, lower as slowly as you can. And we'll try to keep the head of our arm bones or the top of our shoulders away from the ground so our shoulders stay lifted instead of dropping forward. That's not a great position for our shoulder blades. We're gonna keep the hands on the ground. Chin will stay toward the throat so the neck is neutral. So we're not trying to lift up really high for a cobra. What we want is to imagine our low belly lifting up and away from the ground to really keep this low back long and not let it compress. We're gonna keep the glutes squeezing and imagine your palms sliding back. We're gonna draw the chest through. So we're in this really low cobra. Our shoulder blades will start to draw in toward each other, retracting a little bit. And then lower down, hands stay here. Lift back to that quadruped, back to hands and knees. Once you get to your quadruped, our right foot will step through and we'll keep the left knee down, but you might want to scoot it forward. We're not going to take one of these really deep low lunges. We're going to be in more of a 90-90 lunge where the hip is right over the knee and we'll lift up. Checking that pelvic bowl here. Imagine that same diamond shape we had in bridge. So we've got the sides of the diamond, those two pelvic points. Imagine those drawing in toward each other. And then top and bottom of the diamond, the pubic bone and the belly button. Imagine those drawing toward each other. And we want to really squeeze this left glute. So the more we keep this left glute really active, the more of a stretch we're going to get in the front of that left hip flexor. So let's keep that feeling of that upright neutral pelvis and reach the arms up. Anytime your arms lift up, lift your shoulder blades up. So it's like someone's lifting you up by your fingertips. You can still imagine that broom behind your back. So again, if you tend to drop around the shoulders, think about lifting everything up. Stretching that left hip flexor. Lower your hands down. Right foot steps back to quadruped. Lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Left foot steps through. Right knee stays down, lift up. Check that pelvic bowl. Make sure it's not tipping forward, tipping backwards. So think about that diamond drawing in, sides of the diamond, those two pelvic points draw in toward each other. Pubic bone and belly button draw toward each other, and we'll squeeze this right glute. Really opening the front of this right hip, arms will reach up. Imagine someone lifting you up by your fingertips. So we're getting more length in the sides of the body, this active lift up. Holding that neutral pelvis, neutral spine. Think about that broom behind your back. Lower your hands down. Step that left foot back into quadruped. You've got three options. You can take a child's pose, maybe extending the arms out, maybe making a little pillow for your forehead, or you can roll your wrist here, giving them a break. Second option is to stretch it out with that cat-cow. Third option is to tuck your toes, lift the pelvis, walk the feet in for downward dog, lifting the hip creases up, lifting the front ribs up, drawing those pelvic points in. Wherever you are, bend your knees if you're in downward dog. If you're in child's pose or cat-cow, we're gonna walk the feet back up toward the hands and bend the knees. So anytime we're in a forward fold, we're gonna do it just like that happy squat. Hinging at the hips, check where the knees end up. They should be over the ankles. And thinking about that broom behind your back. Press into your feet. Arms will reach forward and up. Reach your shoulder blades up toward the ears. Think about that broom behind your back. Exhale, sit back. We're hinging at the hips. Check where the knees end up. Keep that long spine all the way until the hands come down. So bend the knees as much as you need. Feet will step back to plank. Lift your throat. Dial out the hands. Feel that really strong shoulder blade. Just like bridge pose. Collect that diamond, draw the sides of the diamond in, top and bottom of the diamond in, and squeeze your glutes. Lower your knees, you can untuck the toes. Recheck that triple S. If you had a broom behind your back, Would it touch the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum? Keep that triple S as you lower down. Keep the head of your arm bones away from the ground, so we're not gonna let the shoulders roll forward. Chin will stay towards your throat. Imagine that you could lift your belly button up towards your sacrum. Squeeze your glutes and start to draw the chest through the hands, low cobra. Chin stays toward the throat so the neck is neutral. Lift back to quadruped, back to hands and knees. Right foot will step through. Same type of 90-90 low lunge, but if you'd like, you can tuck the left toes this time, really pressing into the left big toe. Lift up, check that pelvic bowl. Make sure it's not tipping forward or back. Imagine that broom behind your back. Squeeze this left glute. So it's almost like we're trying to push this left pelvic point forward by really squeezing that left glute, and you're gonna get a bigger stretch in the front of that left hip. Arms will reach up. As your arms lift up, now imagine someone lifting you up by your rib cage. So we wanna lift the rib cage up and away from the pelvis. Reach those shoulder blades up. Lower the hands down. You can untuck the left toes. Step that right foot back to quadruped. Lift your throat. Think about that broom behind your back. Left foot steps through. Maybe we tuck the right toes this time, pressing into that right big toe. Lift up. Think about that diamond shape for the pelvis. Draw those pelvic points in. Pubic bone lifts up toward the belly button, and we squeeze that right glute. Reach the arms up. Lift your shoulder blades up towards your ears. So when our shoulder blades lift up toward the ears, that's called elevation. So we're elevating the scapula up toward the ears, squeezing that right glute to stretch that right hip. Lower your hands down. Left foot steps back to that quadruped. You have the same options. You can stretch it out in cat-cow. You can take any type of child's pose that feels good, or you can come to downward dog. Lifting those hip creases up, lifting the front ribs. If you're in downward dog, draw those two pelvic points in. Bend your knees, walk your feet forward. Really bend your knees in that hip hinging forward fold. Check where the knees end up. Spine is long. Use your glutes as you rise to stand. Lift the shoulder blades up toward the ears and release the hands down. We'll bring one hand to the sacrum, one hand to the front of the pelvis. So pubic bone and sacrum, and squeeze those hands together, which is just gonna help the brain realize we need to keep that pelvic bowl upright. And we're gonna work on that same hip flexion we did on our back, but now we're standing. So we're gonna pick up the right foot and just try to bring the knee up, or think about bringing the thigh to the belly. It might not go very high. We wanna make sure no movement happens in the pelvis or the spine, and then step it down. Hold that pelvic bowl upright, flex the left hip. So we'll pick up the left foot, lifting the knee any amount, squeezing that right glute, step it down. Flex the right hip. Hold that neutral pelvis. Step it down. Flex the left hip. Try not to have any tipping forward or back. Step it down. Good, you can release your hands. We're gonna step our right foot back to a high lunge or crescent lunge. So the ball of our right foot will step back. Pelvic points stay facing forward toward the front of the mat, and we'll bend that right knee. So front knee and back knee are bent so that we can hold that pelvic bowl upright. If it's tipping forward, think about lifting your pubic bone, the front of your pelvis, up towards your belly button, and really squeezing the glutes. Arms will reach up, lift the shoulder blades up. And again, think about that broom behind your back. Is the back of your skull, scapula, and sacrum aligned? One more breath here. Lower your hands down. Get ready to step on your left foot. So we're going to squeeze this left glute and step the right foot back to meet the left. Check that upright pelvis. Make sure it's not tipping. Shoulders stay over the pelvis as we step the ball of the left foot back. Bend both knees, zipper that pubic bone up towards your belly. Think about collecting the diamond, sides of the diamond, pelvic points draw in, top and bottom of the diamond, pubic bone and belly button draw toward each other. Arms reach up. Imagine someone lifting you up by your fingertips, so we're elevating the scapula up toward the ears. Keeping that long neutral spine. Think about that broom behind your back. So again, if you tend to drop the head around the shoulders, that's going to affect everything else in the spine. Release your hands down. Really squeeze that right glute. We're going to step on the right foot and the left foot will meet it. Moving into warrior two, our right foot will step toward the back of the mat and the right toes will face the side of the mat. Left knee is bent. Make sure that left knee is facing just about toward the middle toe. And then check that pelvic bowl. Make sure it's not tipping forward. So if you're arching that low back, think about your tailbone grounding straight down toward the ground, pubic bone lifting up toward the belly. We're going to keep the glutes nice and strong the whole time and reach the arms out. Holding here, you can even imagine that broom behind your back. Adding a little bit more movement, we'll reverse it. So we're not going to wiggle the low body at all. We're going to keep it really still, and our right arm will come down toward the right leg. Left arm stretches up and over. Right ear relaxes toward that right shoulder. Keep that feeling of collecting the diamond. Those two pelvic points draw in toward each other. Back to warrior two. And now we'll move into something called warrior variation. So again, we're not going to move the pelvis. We're going to hold it still. Left forearm comes toward the left thigh. Right arm stretches up and over. So we're getting a nice stretch along the right side of the body, right side of the ribs. Squeeze this right glute. Back to warrior two. Release your hands, step it back to the top of the mat. Other side, left foot steps back. Left toes face the side of the mat. Right knee is bent. Make sure it's not rolling in toward the big toe. And again, think about that upright pelvic bowl. We don't want it to tip forward or back. If we tip forward, we're pretty likely to pop the ribs out of place. So we want to think about zippering all the way up the front body, reaching the arms out, holding that upright pelvic bowl. Keep that neutral pelvis as you reverse. Left hand to the left leg. Right arm comes up and over. Let your left ear release to the shoulders so the neck is relaxed. Back to warrior two. Hold the pelvis still. Right forearm to the thigh. Left arm comes up and over. So the only thing that moves here is the ribs. Getting a nice side stretch for the left side of the body. Let the head relax. Squeeze this left glute. Back to warrior two. Release your arms, step it back to the top of the mat. Moving into tree pose for our balance. We're going to start with the hands at the sides of the pelvis, right at the ilium, and we'll flex that right hip. So we're just lifting up the foot, squeezing this left glute. Without turning the whole pelvis, you're just going to externally rotate this right hip to whatever degree feels comfortable, and we'll land it for tree. So the toes can come on the ground, they can come onto that left ankle, shin, knee, thigh, wherever it lands. But again, check that pelvic bowl, make sure it's not tipping. Think about that broom behind your back. So again, if you tend to drop the head forward, that's going to affect the shoulders, which affects the pelvis. So stack the shoulders right on top of the pelvis. You can balance with your arms anywhere. You can have your hands at your heart. You can reach your arms up. You can have the arms down, or you can have them at the pelvis if that feels helpful. Really holding that upright pelvic bowl. Keep squeezing this left glute. That will help hold the pelvis still. And just notice your breath. Try not to hold it. Release it down. You can shake out that left foot a little bit and we'll switch sides. Recheck your posture. Hold that pelvic bowl upright, shoulders stack over the pelvis, hands to the sides of the pelvis. Flex your left hip. Squeeze that right glute. Externally rotate the left hip to whatever amount feels good as you plant it for tree. So again, toes can be on the ground. They can be anywhere on that right leg, but we want to keep that pelvic bowl upright. Hands can come anywhere. You're always welcome to have the hands somewhere on the body as extra feedback or a reminder for whatever needs a little bit of attention or awareness. Trying to gaze in front of you while you balance. Notice your breath. Release it down. Shake out the feet a little bit. I'll show you a few things you can do with the broom. You can do it with a stick, a dowel, a broom, a mop, whatever you have. So again, we just want to line up the broom, touching the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum. And just start to move through some of these things we did in class and notice if the broom can stay touching those three things. So we did that hip hinge in the beginning. We can do a high lunge. Think about that broom behind your back. We can open it out for warrior two. Check that triple S, even as you reverse, variation. We should keep those three things all in the same plane. Maybe we're doing that marching, maybe a tree pose. You can go all the way into a low lunge. Think about that broom behind your back, or a plank pose. So a broom is a great way to just check in with your posture, give yourself a little bit of that feedback. Let's stretch it out a little bit. We're gonna head onto our backs, just like we did in the beginning, checking that triple S, back of the skull, shoulder blades and sacrum on the mat. Coming into a hip stretch, we're gonna flex that right hip. So bring the thigh toward the belly, externally rotate like we did right before tree, and then cross that right ankle over the left thigh. Make sure the sacrum stays down, so we don't want to tip the pelvis forward here, having that arch in the back. Right hand will press that right thigh away. Now if this feels like a big stretch for that right hip, just stay here. Take a few breaths. If you want to go a little bit further into the stretch, we're going to lift up the left foot without interlacing the hands behind the thigh. So hands can just stay at the sides of your body. And again, try to slow your breath down. Release it down, and we'll switch. Flex the left hip, externally rotate. Cross it over the right thigh. Check that triple S. Left hand can press that left thigh away. If you want to go deeper, pick up that right foot without interlacing the hands behind the thigh. Take a few deep breaths here. Release it down. We'll finish in Shavasana, coming to any comfortable position on your back. You can stay here with the feet on the mat, especially if that feels best in the low back. If you'd like, you can extend the legs out and just let your arms and legs rest in any position. Eyes will close. Relax your forehead. Relax your jaw. Come back to whatever your natural breath is.